Welcome to another scenario of alternative history, thoughts you get before going to sleep. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you were listening from and what time it is right now. Are you drifting off in Tokyo as dawn approaches, or settling into darkness somewhere across the Atlantic? Wherever you are, let your mind wander with us tonight into a world that never was, but perhaps could have been. Imagine a world where the evolutionary path diverged not in grand empires or battlefield moments, but in something far more fundamental, written into the very biology of our species. Imagine that millions of years ago, as our ancestors descended from the trees and began walking upright across the African savanna, they retained something their descendants in our timeline gradually lost. Imagine that humans kept their fur. In our reality, somewhere between 2 and 3 million years ago, the human lineage began losing its thick body hair, retaining only patches on the head, face, underarms, and groin. Scientists believe this happened as our ancestors adapted to new hunting strategies, developing more sweat glands to cool their bodies during the heat of the day, allowing them to pursue prey over long distances. The loss of fur, combined with dark skin protection and efficient sweating, became a remarkable cooling system. But what if this transformation never occurred? What if some environmental factor, some genetic quirk, some different evolutionary pressure meant that Homo sapiens emerged into consciousness covered in a full coat of body hair? This is not a small change. This is not merely aesthetic. The presence of fur would have rippled through every aspect of human development, touching everything from where we chose to live, to how we signaled status, to the very foundations of technology and culture. In this timeline, as the first anatomically modern humans emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago, they looked quite different from the humans we know. They walked upright, their hands were free, their brains were large and complex, but their bodies were covered in a dense layer of hair, perhaps an inch or two long, varying in color from deep brown to black, with regional variations developing over time. The immediate advantage was clear in certain environments. As these early humans migrated, they found that colder climates welcomed them more easily than in our timeline. The northward expansion that took tens of thousands of years in our history might have occurred more rapidly, with less evolutionary adaptation needed. Groups moving into Europe during interglacial periods, or eventually into the Ice Age environments of the far north, carried their insulation with them. They did not need to wait for genetic changes to lighten their skin or adapt their bodies. They were already prepared. But advantages in one area create challenges in another. The tropical and subtropical regions, the cradle of humanity, presented different problems. A third human in equatorial heat would struggle with temperature regulation in ways their hairless cousins did not. Evolution might have compensated in various ways, perhaps with longer, looser hair that allowed better air circulation, perhaps with more efficient sweating through exposed skin on the palms, soles, and face. Perhaps these humans developed behavioral adaptations, becoming nocturnal in the hottest regions, or creating the earliest forms of grooming culture, trimming and maintaining their fur in ways that promoted cooling. This grooming, this necessity of managing one's own fur, would become one of the first technologies, one of the first social bonds. Picture our ancestors sitting together as the sun sets over the savanna, using primitive tools to trim, clean, and maintain each other's coats. This is more than hygiene. This is trust, intimacy, social bonding. It is communication without words. The individual who is well-groomed is one who has allies, family, community. The individual with matted, unkempt fur is alone, perhaps sick, perhaps exiled. These visual signals would have spoken volumes. As language developed, as culture became more complex, the presence of fur would have created different categories of thought, different ways of seeing the world. There would be no concept of nakedness as we understand it, no fundamental distinction between clothed and unclothed states in most climates. The body was always covered, always protected. This would reshape notions of modesty,
of privacy, of intimacy. What would become taboo would not be skin, but perhaps the deliberate removal or exposure of one's natural covering. The patterns, colors, and conditions of one's fur would tell stories, reveal age, health, genetic heritage, and social standing.
In the millennia following the emergence of modern humans, the immediate consequences of retained body hair shaped migration, settlement, and the earliest technologies. As groups spread across Africa and beyond, they encountered environments that tested their furred bodies in different ways. The archaeological record of this alternative timeline would look different from ours, revealing tools and innovations we might not immediately recognize. The first tools developed not for hunting or farming, but for fur maintenance. Sharp-edged stones used not primarily as weapons, but as grooming implements, cutting edges designed to trim and shape hair. Combs carved from bone appear in the archaeological record much earlier than in our timeline, not as luxury items, but as essential survival tools. These grooming implements would be among the most common artifacts, suggesting that fur care occupied significant time and cultural importance. A person could survive without perfect hunting tools, but they could not easily survive with badly maintained fur, matted, infested, or damaged. The development of fire would carry different meanings. While warmth remained important, especially as humans moved into temperate regions, fire served other crucial functions. It provided light for grooming after dark, it created smoke to repel insects that might infest fur, and it offered a gathering place where social grooming could occur. The hearth became central to human life not only for cooking and warmth, but as a grooming station, a social hub where the day's debris could be picked from fur, where parasites could be spotted and removed, where the young could learn the essential skills of fur maintenance from their elders. Clothing would develop differently, appearing later and serving different purposes. In our timeline, clothing protected bare skin from cold, sun, and injury. In this timeline, the primary need for covering was already met. Early garments, when they appeared, might have been more about protection from specific hazards, leather patches to protect fur from thorns, wrappings to keep fur dry in rain, decorative additions rather than fundamental necessities. The oldest evidence of clothing in this timeline might appear not in cold climates, but in desert regions, where wrappings protected light-colored fur from the intense sun. As humans settled into different regions, their fur would begin to diversify through natural selection. In the far north, fur grew thicker, longer, with perhaps a double coat like many Arctic mammals, providing exceptional insulation. In equatorial regions, fur evolved to be shorter, sparser on some areas of the body, perhaps lighter in color to reflect heat. Populations in temperate zones developed seasonal variation, growing heavier winter coats that shed in spring. These differences became markers of ancestry, of ancient migrations, written on the body itself for all to see. The social implications emerged early. Physical appearance was less malleable than in our timeline. One could not simply change clothing to signal status or group membership. Identity was literally grown, inherited, visible. This might have strengthened kinship bonds, as family resemblance was more immediately apparent. A child with their father's distinctive red fur pattern could never deny their lineage. An outsider trying to infiltrate a group would be immediately recognizable by their different code characteristics. This visibility of heritage might have made intergroup conflict more intense, as differences were impossible to hide, but it might equally have made diplomatic marriage alliances more binding, as the children of such unions would carry visible proof of both lineages. Color variations would have appeared and carried meaning. Most human fur in this timeline would range from dark brown to black, particularly in populations remaining near equatorial regions. But as groups migrated and adapted, different colors emerged through mutation in sexual selection. Reddish fur, lighter brown shades, and in extreme northern latitudes, even light blonde or gray fur might have evolved for camouflage of vitamin D synthesis. These colors would become associated with specific regions, specific peoples, specific ancestral lines. A dark-furred individual among light-furred populations, or vice versa, would immediately signal foreign origin or mixed ancestry. Grooming practices would begin to vary by culture, becoming some of the earliest expressions of cultural identity. Some groups might favor shorter, tightly maintained fur. Others might allow their hair to grow longer, perhaps braiding or styling it. Certain patterns of trimming might indicate age, status, or achievements.
A warrior returning from a successful battle might cut specific patterns into their fur, visible to all. A person in mourning might leave their fur untended for a period, showing their grief through their appearance. These practices would vary enormously by culture, creating a rich tapestry of human expression even before the development of complex material culture. Parasites would be a constant concern, shaping behavior and belief systems. Lice, fleas, ticks, and mites would find ready homes in human fur, requiring constant vigilance. Groups would develop techniques to combat infestations, perhaps using smoke, certain plants with repellent properties, or regular immersion in water. Communities would share knowledge about which herbs, when crushed and rubbed into fur, would discourage parasites. This practical knowledge might blend with spiritual beliefs, certain plants becoming sacred, grooming rituals taking on religious significance. Cleanliness would be strongly associated with virtue, righteousness, and social acceptance.
As human societies grew from small bands into tribes, chiefdoms, and eventually the first states, the presence of fur influenced political structures in subtle but profound ways. Leadership and authority found new symbols, new ways of being expressed and recognized. In a world where everyone is covered, where the manipulation of appearance is limited, power needed different visual languages. The earliest chiefs and leaders might have been distinguished by the exceptional quality of their grooming, maintained through having many allies willing to spend time on their appearance. A leader with perfectly maintained, lustrous fur announced to all that they had supporters, that people were willing to invest time in their well-being. This created a visible feedback loop where successful leaders looked more impressive, which reinforced their authority, which attracted more supporters. The very best groomed individuals in a community were likely also the most politically connected. But as societies became more complex, deliberate modification of fur became a political tool. Shaving, trimming, dyeing with natural pigments, these became marks of status that transcended natural appearance. A king might have his fur trimmed in elaborate patterns that no common person could replicate, requiring hours of skilled labor. Priests might shave portions of their bodies, marking themselves as different, as dedicated to gods rather than worldly concerns. These modifications served as unforgeable badges of rank, visible to all, difficult to fake without the resources and social permission to make such changes. In the first city-states emerging in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, fur modification would be recorded in art and described in early writing. Sumerian kings might be depicted with geometrically trimmed beards and body fur, each pattern signifying their achievements and divine right to rule. Egyptian pharaohs might wear elaborate gold and lapis ornaments woven into their fur, combining natural covering with artificial splendor. These practices required specialists, skilled groomers who became important craftspeople, perhaps even forming guilds that held significant political influence. The development of textiles would follow a different path. Weaving and cloth production would emerge not primarily for clothing, but for other purposes: decoration, ceremonial use, protecting furnishings from fur oils, creating barriers for privacy. When garments did develop, they served as secondary layers, additions to natural covering rather than replacements for it. A wealthy merchant might wear a fine woven vest over their chest fur, not for warmth but as a display of wealth. A soldier might wear leather armor plates, but these would be designed to accommodate fur beneath, perhaps with ventilation to prevent overheating. Military culture would adapt to furred bodies. Armor development would be influenced by the need to accommodate hair, creating different engineering challenges than in our timeline. Close-fitting metal armor would be impractical, causing overheating and matted, damaged fur beneath. Warfare might favor looser-fitting protection, scale armor or segmented plates that allowed air circulation. Alternatively, soldiers might shave the areas where armor would be worn, sacrificing comfort for protection, making military service literally visible on the body. Conquered peoples and slaves might be forcibly groomed in degrading ways, their fur cut in patterns that marked their subjugation. This physical marking would serve as a constant reminder of status, one that could not be easily hidden or removed.
Alternatively, conquerors might impose grooming standards on subjugated populations, requiring them to adopt the fur styles of their rulers as a symbol of cultural domination. Resistance movements might then express themselves through forbidden grooming practices, growing their fur in traditional styles as an act of defiance. The concept of civilization itself might be tied to grooming standards. Greek philosophers might define barbaroi not only by language, but by grooming practices, seeing well-maintained, styled fur as a mark of civilization, while unkempt, natural growth indicated barbarism. Romans might require subject peoples to adopt Roman grooming standards as part of Romanization, spreading their aesthetics along with their laws and language. The famous Roman baths would serve partly as grooming facilities, places where fur could be washed, trimmed, and maintained according to proper standards. Trade routes would carry not only spices and silk, but grooming technologies, tools, dyes, and techniques. A particularly effective comb design from China might spread along the Silk Road, revolutionizing fur maintenance across Eurasia. Dyes derived from distant sources would become valuable trade goods, allowing people to color their fur in rare shades, signaling access to far-flung trade networks. Certain oils or balms that gave fur exceptional luster might become as valuable as gold, with monopolies fought over and trade secrets jealously guarded. Religious and political authority would intertwine with grooming practices. Priests might claim that only they knew the proper ways to maintain fur that pleased the gods. Monarchs might declare that certain colors or styles could only be worn by royalty, with commoners forbidden from such displays under pain of death. These sumptuary laws would be easier to enforce than in our timeline, as fur modification was time-consuming and visible, difficult to hide or quickly change when authorities approached. A peasant could not simply remove a forbidden garment. They had grown their transgression and would wear it until it grew out or was forcibly removed.
The cultural and social dimensions of a furred humanity would weave through every aspect of daily life, creating traditions, taboos, and social structures unrecognizable in our timeline. From birth to death, the human experience would be fundamentally different, shaped by the ever-present covering that connected every person to their ancestry and community. Childhood would begin with the fine, soft fur of infancy, often lighter and fluffier than adult coats. Parents would spend hours grooming their children, teaching them from the earliest age to care for their own bodies. This grooming would be one of the primary ways love and affection were expressed, as essential as feeding or protection. A child who was well groomed was a child who was loved. Neglected children would show it in their matted, dirty fur long before malnutrition became apparent. This would make abuse and neglect more visible to communities, potentially creating stronger social intervention in cases of child mistreatment. Coming-of-age ceremonies might involve the first adult grooming, where adolescents learn to maintain their own fur independently, no longer relying on parents. In some cultures, young people might undergo their first fur dyeing or styling, marking their transition to adulthood with permanent changes to their appearance. The pattern chosen might reflect their role in society, their family line, or their personal choices. This moment would carry enormous significance, as it announced to the community that a child had become an autonomous adult. Courtship and romance would develop around grooming practices. To allow someone to groom your fur would be an act of trust and intimacy, perhaps equivalent to or exceeding physical intimacy in our timeline. Lovers would spend hours grooming each other, learning every inch of each other's bodies through careful maintenance. Marriage proposals might involve one partner offering to maintain the other's fur for life, a pledge of permanent devotion. Wedding ceremonies might include the ritual grooming of both partners by their families one final time before they began grooming each other. Beauty standards would revolve around fur quality, color, and condition. Lustrous, thick, well-maintained fur would be universally admired, but specific preferences would vary enormously by culture. Some societies might favor longer fur, seeing it as a sign of health and vitality. Others might prefer shorter, sleeker coats.
Color preferences would vary, with some cultures seeing dark fur as most attractive, others favoring lighter shades, still others prizing unusual colors like red or auburn as rare and special. Body hair patterns would be analyzed and appreciated, with certain distributions considered more aesthetically pleasing than others. Fashion would exist but take different forms. Rather than changing garments, people would modify their fur through trimming, styling, and dyeing. Trends would spread slowly, as growing out a new pattern or color took time. What was fashionable this year might not be achievable until next year, creating a slower, more deliberate cycle of style. The very wealthy might afford more frequent changes, having servants who could work elaborate patterns that would be trimmed away and replaced regularly. Common people might choose one style and maintain it for years, only making changes for special occasions. Language would reflect this furred existence. Phrases and metaphors would reference grooming and fur condition. To describe someone as matted might mean they were confused or troubled, unable to maintain themselves properly. Someone well-combed might be organized and capable. Expressions of affection might involve references to grooming. "You smooth my fur," as a way of saying, "You bring me peace." Insults might reference unkempt coats or suggesting someone had mange or parasites, implying social isolation and moral failing. Different professions would emerge around fur care. Master groomers would be respected artisans, their skills in high demand among the wealthy. Barbers would serve common folk, providing affordable maintenance in market squares. Dye makers would develop complex chemical knowledge, creating colors from minerals, plants, and insects. Tool makers would specialize in combs, scissors, and razors, designed specifically for fur rather than hair alone. These professions would form guilds, pass down techniques through apprenticeships, and guard their secrets carefully. Religious practices would incorporate grooming into rituals and requirements. Some faiths might require adherents to maintain their fur in natural states, seeing modification as a sinful pride. Others might mandate specific grooming patterns as signs of devotion, with priests maintaining elaborate styles that took hours each day to prepare. Monastic traditions might require shaving portions of the body as symbols of renunciation, monks and nuns visibly marked by their sacrifice of natural covering. Pilgrimages might involve vows not to groom until reaching a sacred site, arriving with deliberately unkempt fur as proof of devotion. Funerary practices would address the question of what happened to fur after death. Some cultures might carefully preserve the fur of the deceased, keeping locks as mementos, weaving them into family tapestries that recorded lineages. Others might see the death as rendering the body, including fur, unclean, requiring immediate cremation. Certain traditions might involve final grooming of the dead, preparing them for the afterlife by ensuring they arrived with perfect, dignified appearance. Grave goods might include favorite combs, grooming oils, or tools meant to serve the deceased in whatever came next.
The economic landscape of this alternative world would be shaped by the needs and opportunities created by universal fur covering. Trade networks, industries, and wealth accumulation would follow patterns both familiar and strange, driven by demands that existed only in this timeline where humanity remained furred. The grooming industry would be among the largest sectors of every economy, comparable perhaps to the textile industry in our timeline. Every person needed tools to maintain their fur, creating constant demand for combs, scissors, razors, and specialized implements. Quality tools would be expensive, passed down through generations, repaired and maintained carefully. Poor quality tools would damage fur, making them worse than useless. This created opportunities for skilled metalworkers and craftspeople who could produce superior implements. Natural resources for fur care would drive trade across continents. Certain oils, derived from plants or animals, would be prized for their ability to condition fur, add luster, or repel parasites. These oils might come from specific regions, making them valuable trade commodities. Olive oil from the Mediterranean, coconut oil from tropical regions, animal fats rendered and refined, all would move along trade routes to meet demands for fur maintenance. Control of sources for premium oils could make cities or regions wealthy, as demand would be constant and universal. Dye production would be a major industry, rivaling or exceeding its importance in our timeline. Natural dyes derived from plants, minerals, and insects would be valuable trade goods. Tyrian purple from sea snails, crimson from cochineal insects, indigo from plants. These colors would command high prices among those wishing to modify their fur color. The techniques for applying dyes to growing fur without damaging it would be trade secrets, with master dyers commanding high fees for their services. Chemical knowledge would advance partly in service to creating new dyes, fixing colors permanently or removing unwanted colors without harming fur. Textile production would exist but serve different markets. Cloth would not be needed for basic covering, changing the fundamental economics of weaving. Fine textiles might be luxury goods used for decoration, furnishings, or ceremonial purposes rather than everyday necessities. This could mean slower development of industrial textile production with less economic pressure to mechanize weaving. Alternatively, cloth might be used for other purposes, creating different but equally important industries. Furnishings would need covers to protect them from fur oils and shed hair. Bedding would be essential, as people would leave behind more hair and body oils than in our timeline. Water resources would be valued differently. Regular washing of fur would be important for health and social acceptance, making access to clean water crucial. Cities might develop around rivers or springs not only for drinking water, but for bathing facilities. Public baths would be central institutions, places where people could properly wash their fur with help from attendants if needed. These facilities would require fuel for heating water, creating demand for wood or coal, shaping forestry and mining industries. The soap-making industry would be essential, with demand for products that cleaned fur without stripping protective oils or causing irritation. Parasiticide plants and chemicals would be valuable trade goods. Any substance that reliably killed or repelled lice, fleas, ticks, or mites without harming humans would be worth significant money. Trade routes might develop specifically to transport these materials from regions where they naturally occurred to population centers where demand was high. Monopolies on effective parasiticides could create wealth and power. Wars might be fought over access to regions producing the most effective treatments. Medical knowledge would advance partly through research into parasites and methods of controlling them. The seasonal nature of some fur growth in temperate regions would create economic patterns. Spring shedding seasons might generate waste products that enterprising people would find uses for. Shed fur could be collected and processed, perhaps spun into yarn for textiles or used as stuffing for mattresses and cushions. Industries might develop around collection and processing of shed hair, creating jobs for the poor while providing materials for other industries. Markets for used grooming tools, recycled oils, and other secondary products would emerge wherever people gathered. Labor patterns would be affected by grooming needs. Every person would need to spend time each day on basic maintenance, perhaps an hour or more, depending on fur length and complexity. This would reduce available time for other productive activities. Alternatively, it might create service economies, where those with means could pay others to maintain their fur, freeing their own time. Grooming servants would be common in wealthy households, their skills and trustworthiness highly valued. These servants would occupy complex social positions, having intimate access to their employers' bodies, privy to private conversations during long grooming sessions. Seasonal economic patterns would emerge based on fur growth cycles. In regions with cold winters, people might allow fur to grow longer in autumn, then trim it shorter in spring. This would create seasonal spikes in demand for grooming services, tools, and supplies. Merchants would anticipate these patterns, stocking up before high-demand seasons. Prices would fluctuate, creating opportunities for speculators and traders who could correctly anticipate market movements. Weather predictions would carry economic importance, as unexpected cold snaps or warm spells would affect when people modified their fur length.
Wealth inequality would be visible in fur condition and styling. The rich would display their status through elaborate grooming that required hours of skilled labor, dyeing in expensive colors, and maintenance using premium products. The poor would make do with basic grooming, using simple tools and cheap oils, their fur showing the markers of their economic status. This visibility of wealth would make class divisions obvious, but might also create pressure on those of middling means to spend beyond their resources on appearance, leading to debt and economic instability.
Scientific and technological development would follow different paths in a world of furred humans, with some innovations appearing earlier, others later, and some never emerging at all. The presence of body hair would pose unique challenges and inspire unique solutions, shaping the trajectory of human knowledge in ways both subtle and profound. Medical understanding would develop with fur as a complicating factor. Doctors examining patients would need to work around or through fur to assess conditions. Diagnostic techniques would adapt, perhaps relying more on palpation rather than visual inspection of skin. Skin diseases would present differently, often discovered later than in our timeline, as they would be hidden beneath fur until quite advanced. This might make certain conditions more dangerous or might drive earlier development of techniques to examine through fur cover. Parasitology would advance rapidly out of necessity. Understanding the life cycles of lice, fleas, and mites would be crucial for public health. Microscopy might be pursued earlier or with different priorities, as the ability to examine parasites would have immediate practical applications. Natural histories of insects would be detailed and precise, especially regarding those species that infested humans. Folk knowledge about parasites would be extensive, with every culture developing techniques and remedies passed down through generations. The development of effective pesticides might occur earlier, driven by constant demand for relief from infestation. Chemistry would advance partly in service to grooming needs, understanding how to create stable dyes, how to formulate oils that penetrated fur without causing irritation, how to produce soaps that cleaned effectively without damage. These challenges would drive chemical knowledge. Alkali production, oil refining, distillation of essences from plants, all would be pursued with grooming applications in mind. This might lead to earlier industrial chemistry in some ways, or might direct chemical knowledge toward different applications than in our timeline, creating alternative technological paths. The development of clothing would be less pressured, potentially slowing textile innovation. Without the necessity of creating artificial covering, mechanical looms might develop later. The Industrial Revolution's famous textile mills might not be the driving force of industrialization in this timeline. However, other industries related to grooming might mechanize first. Factories producing combs, scissors, and grooming tools might lead industrialization. Steam power might first be applied to water heating for large public baths rather than to powering textile machinery. Understanding of human evolution would develop differently. When scientists in this timeline examined the question of their origins, the similarities between human fur and that of other primates would be more obvious, making evolutionary connections clearer. Darwin's theories might be accepted more quickly, as the physical evidence of common ancestry would be harder to deny. Conversely, some might argue that human fur proved divine creation, as humans retained the perfect covering provided by their creator. These debates would shake scientific and religious thought in unique ways. Climate science and meteorology might advance differently. With fur providing natural insulation, people would be less driven to develop sophisticated clothing systems in response to weather. However, understanding of heat and cold's effects on fur bodies would be detailed and practical. Seasonal patterns would be carefully observed, as they would affect when people needed to modify fur length. Weather prediction would have immediate personal relevance to everyone, potentially creating broad public interest in meteorological advancement. Photography, when invented, would capture images of people as furred beings. The aesthetic conventions of portraiture would develop differently, with lighting and composition techniques designed to show fur texture and color to best advantage. Film development might need to capture different tones and contrasts. The selfie culture of the modern era, if it emerged, would focus on fur styling, with people documenting their latest grooming patterns or color choices rather than fashion choices.
Hygiene science and public health would grapple with challenges specific to furred humans. Understanding how diseases spread through populations with fur cover would be crucial for developing effective quarantine and treatment protocols. Certain diseases might spread differently, with parasites serving as disease vectors in ways they didn't in our timeline. Public health campaigns might focus heavily on grooming education, teaching proper fur maintenance as disease prevention. School children might receive grooming instruction as part of their basic education. Cosmetic science would be a major field of research, understanding skin and hair chemistry beneath fur, developing products that improved appearance without causing harm, testing for allergens and irritants. These would occupy many researchers. Testing on animals might be even more common than in our timeline, or might be seen as less necessary since human fur could be directly studied. Regulations about product safety would emerge from public demand, as bad products could cause visible, lasting damage to one's appearance. Military technology would adapt to furred soldiers. Gas masks would need to seal against furred faces, requiring different designs than in our timeline. Chemical weapons might be developed or deployed differently, with agents that could penetrate fur or that caused it to fall out, inflicting psychological as well as physical damage on victims. Protective gear against radiation or biological agents would need to account for fur, creating unique engineering challenges. These requirements might drive innovation in materials science and protective equipment design.
As centuries passed and civilizations rose and fell, the fur-covered humanity of this timeline would create a global culture both unified and diverse. The common experience of living in furred bodies would connect all people, while regional variations in fur characteristics, grooming practices, and cultural meanings would create rich diversity across continents. The ripple effects would touch every aspect of human interaction on the world stage. The age of exploration would unfold with different dynamics. When Europeans ventured across oceans to encounter distant peoples, the first observations would note fur characteristics. Spanish conquistadors meeting Aztecs would describe their distinctive grooming styles and dyeing practices alongside their temples and gold. Portuguese traders reaching Japan would marvel at Japanese grooming aesthetics, perhaps finding them exotic or refined compared to European standards. These descriptions would fill ships' logs and early ethnographic accounts, cataloging human diversity through the lens of fur variation. Colonialism would impose grooming standards along with languages and religions. European powers might require colonized peoples to adopt European grooming styles as part of civilizing missions. Missionaries might see traditional grooming practices as pagan or barbaric, attempting to replace them with Christian grooming codes. Resistance to colonialism might express itself partly through maintaining traditional fur styles, making grooming a site of cultural struggle. Indigenous peoples forced to adopt foreign grooming practices would experience this as another form of cultural violence, erasing visible markers of their identity. The transatlantic slave trade would carry additional horrors in this timeline. Enslaved Africans transported to the Americas would have their traditional grooming practices violently disrupted. Slavers might forcibly shave or alter their fur, erasing cultural identity and asserting dominance. Enslaved people would struggle to maintain proper grooming under brutal conditions, with matted or damaged fur adding to their suffering. Yet communities would preserve what knowledge they could, teaching children traditional styles in secret, maintaining connection to African heritage through carefully preserved grooming traditions. After emancipation, the right to groom one's own fur according to one's own choices would be a powerful symbol of freedom. Global trade networks would spread grooming products and techniques. Chinese combs might reach Europe, European dyes might reach Asia, African oils might spread worldwide. This exchange would happen gradually over centuries through the Silk Road, maritime routes, and eventually colonial commerce.
A merchant class with access to exotic grooming products might emerge in major trading cities, displaying their cosmopolitan connections through unusual fur styles achievable only with imported materials. The Industrial Revolution would mechanize grooming tool production, making quality implements affordable for common people. Factories would mass-produce combs, scissors, and razors, democratizing access to good grooming. However, this might also create new forms of exploitation, with workers in grooming supply factories laboring long hours in poor conditions. Labor movements might emerge around these industries as elsewhere. Trade unions for groomers and fur care workers would organize, demanding better conditions and pay. Global fashion trends would develop slowly, spreading through travel, trade, and eventually photography and film. A grooming style popular in Paris might take years to reach other continents, then more years to be adopted and adapted by local populations. Regional variations would remain strong even as global communication improved. What was fashionable in London might be unknown in Beijing, while Tokyo might develop entirely unique aesthetics. This would create a more diverse global culture than in our timeline, where modern fashion can spread globally in weeks. World wars would conscript furred soldiers from every continent. Military standardization might require simplified grooming that could be maintained in trenches or on ships. Soldiers returning home might bring grooming styles from foreign lands learned from Allied troops or adopted in occupied territories. War brides and displaced persons would carry grooming traditions to new lands, contributing to cultural mixing. The trauma of war might be visible in neglected fur, with shell-shocked veterans unable to maintain themselves properly, their suffering written on their bodies for all to see. The Cold War era would see competing visions of proper grooming. Soviet propaganda might promote utilitarian grooming, criticizing Western decadence and elaborate styling. American culture might celebrate individual expression through diverse fur styles, contrasting this freedom with enforced conformity behind the Iron Curtain. Each side would use grooming practices to argue for the superiority of their system. Beauty pageants might become Cold War battlegrounds, with each side's contestants displaying their nation's grooming ideals. Decolonization movements would reclaim traditional grooming practices. As former colonies gained independence, there would be a renaissance in indigenous fur styles, consciously rejecting colonial impositions. National identity would be expressed through distinctive grooming that referenced pre-colonial traditions while creating new forms. Hair becomes political, carrying meanings about freedom, cultural pride, and resistance to homogenization. International meetings would showcase this diversity, with delegates wearing their nation's identity literally on their bodies. Globalization in the late 20th century would accelerate exchange, but also create tension. Western grooming products would flood global markets, threatening local traditions and industries. Multinational corporations would market standardized beauty ideals, while local movements would resist, insisting on the value of traditional practices. Some would embrace global styles, while others would militantly preserve local customs. Youth culture might rebel against traditional grooming, adopting foreign styles to assert independence from parental generation, creating generational conflicts expressed through fur styling.
Generations pass, and we arrive at a world recognizable yet strange, where humanity has lived with fur throughout recorded history and into an era of advanced technology. This is a world that might exist several generations into our own future, where the descendants of furred humans navigate modern life with the ancient covering their ancestors never lost. In this contemporary era, grooming technology has advanced dramatically. Laser trimmers provide precision impossible with manual tools. Computer-guided styling allows perfect symmetry, and genetic treatments can temporarily alter fur color at the follicle level, allowing changes that reverse themselves as new growth emerges. These technologies are available primarily to the wealthy, creating new dimensions of inequality.
The rich display their status through impossible precision in their fur styling, patterns so complex they could only be achieved through expensive technology, colors so vivid they must come from genetic modification. Virtual reality and augmented reality have created new possibilities for appearance. People can overlay digital filters onto their fur in video calls or social media, experimenting with styles they cannot physically achieve. This virtual grooming allows instant transformation, trying different colors, patterns, or even lengths with a thought. Some people maintain carefully curated online presences, with virtual grooming wildly different from their physical appearance, creating distance between their digital and physical selves. Debates rage about authenticity, whether this represents healthy experimentation or dangerous disconnection from physical reality. Medical science has nearly eliminated parasites in developed nations, though they remain problems in poorer regions, creating public health disparities. Gene editing has allowed some people to modify their children's fur before birth, choosing color, texture, or density. This has generated intense ethical debates about designer babies and the modification of human nature. Some nations ban the practice, while others embrace it, creating genetic tourism where expectant parents travel to jurisdictions allowing such modifications. The long-term consequences remain unknown, with the first generation of genetically modified humans only now reaching adulthood. Climate change affects human fur comfort zones in new ways. Rising global temperatures make dense fur disadvantageous in many regions. Some people opt for medical treatments to thin their fur permanently, while others endure discomfort, seeing their natural covering as essential to their identity. Migration patterns shift as people seek climates suitable for their fur density, with cool regions receiving more immigration, while tropical zones see emigration to more temperate latitudes. This climate-driven migration creates political tensions, with receiving nations struggling to accommodate arrivals, while source nations lose population. Space exploration faces unique challenges with furred humans. Fur in zero gravity presents problems, with loose hairs floating through spacecraft, potentially clogging filters or obscuring vision. Astronauts must wear special suits even inside habitats, or undergo temporary fur reduction treatments before missions. Grooming in space requires special tools that capture all trimmed hair, prevent escaped fragments from contaminating systems. The first Mars colonists debate whether to genetically modify their children for reduced fur, better suiting them to life in enclosed habitats, sparking controversies about human adaptation to alien worlds. Artificial intelligence has mastered grooming, with robots capable of maintaining human fur more precisely than human groomers. However, many people prefer human touch, seeing grooming as an intimate act requiring human presence. High-end salons employ human stylists for a luxury service, while budget establishments use AI. This creates class divisions in grooming experiences, with wealthy enjoying human attention while the less affluent submit to mechanical efficiency. Some people never experience human grooming, growing up with only AI maintenance, perhaps losing something in the process. Fashion has become more rapid through temporary dyes that last days or weeks. People can change their fur color to match moods, events, or trends, cycling through styles impossible in earlier eras. This has democratized appearance modification to some degree, allowing anyone to experiment with different looks. However, it has also created pressure to constantly update one's appearance to keep current with the latest trends, generating anxiety and expense. Some people reject this entirely, maintaining natural appearance as a statement against consumer culture. Cultural appropriation debates center on grooming practices. When someone adopts grooming styles from a culture not their own, is this appreciation or theft? Who has the right to wear certain patterns, colors, or styles? These questions generate intense discussion online and in academic circles.
Some argue that grooming practices should be shared freely, that cultural exchange enriches everyone. Others insist that traditional styles have specific meanings and should be respected as the property of cultures that created them. These debates reflect broader tensions about identity, ownership, and cultural respect. Environmental movements have emerged around grooming product sustainability. The global industry generates enormous waste, consuming resources and producing pollution. Activists advocate for natural products, minimal grooming, or even complete rejection of modification, allowing fur to grow in natural states regardless of social expectations. These natural fur movements attract followers who see excessive grooming as environmental damage and social control. They advocate for acceptance of all bodies in all states, challenging beauty standards that require time, money, and resource consumption. Mental health understanding has recognized grooming behaviors as windows into psychological states. Depression often manifests in neglected fur, anxiety in obsessive over-grooming, body dysmorphia in extreme modification. Therapists are trained to observe grooming patterns, to ask about changes in appearance as indicators of mental health. Treatment programs for various conditions include grooming therapy, helping patients establish healthy relationships with their bodies. This recognition has reduced stigma around fur-related mental health issues, encouraging people to seek help. The oldest humans alive remember a world before genetic modification, before AI groomers, before temporary dyes and laser trimmers. They remember when grooming was always done by hand, when styles changed slowly, when appearance was determined more by genetics and patient maintenance than by technology. They wonder at the world their descendants inhabit, at the possibilities and pressures of modern grooming culture. They offer perspective on what has been gained and lost, though the young rarely listen, focused on navigating their own era's unique challenges.
If we step back and compare this alternate timeline to our own, we find a world that diverged from a single biological difference and created cascades of change rippling through millennia. In quiet moments of reflection, we can appreciate how much of human experience stems from the simple presence or absence of body hair, how profoundly biology shapes culture, and how differently history might have unfolded from the smallest changes. In our reality, humans lost their fur and developed clothing, creating textile industries that drove technological innovation. The Industrial Revolution began in textile mills, mechanical looms transforming manufacturing and labor. In the furred timeline, textiles never became essential, perhaps allowing other industries to lead industrialization, changing the pace and nature of technological development. The absence of mass clothing production might have meant slower urbanization, different labor movements, alternative paths to modernity. Or perhaps other industries would have risen to fill the role, mechanizing grooming tool production or bath heating, creating their own revolutions. Our world's concepts of modesty, privacy, and sexuality developed around bare skin and clothing. The furred timeline would have entirely different norms, different taboos, different meanings attached to bodies and their display. What is shameful or provocative would be defined differently. Intimacy might mean something else when bodies are always covered, when choosing to let someone groom you carries significance that mere nakedness never could. These differences would reshape not just personal relationships, but art, literature, religious thought, and law. The visibility of ancestry in the furred world would create different dynamics around race and ethnicity. In our timeline, skin color became a marker that enabled racism and discrimination. In the furred timeline, fur color and pattern would serve similar functions, creating hierarchies and prejudices, perhaps in similar patterns or perhaps entirely differently. The specific history of colonialism, slavery, and racial categories would be altered, though human capacity for creating and enforcing divisions would likely find expression regardless.
The question is whether the visibility of fur variations would make discrimination more or less intense, more or less subtle. Migration and cultural exchange would follow different patterns. In our world, people can adopt new clothing styles relatively quickly when moving to new regions. In the furred world, changing one's grooming to match a new culture takes time, making assimilation slower, but also making one's origins harder to conceal. This might create more persistent cultural enclaves, where immigrant communities maintain traditional grooming for generations. Or it might create pressure for rapid adaptation, with newcomers quickly adopting local styles to fit in, erasing their cultural markers more deliberately and visibly than in our timeline. Our world's beauty industry focuses on cosmetics, clothing, and hairstyling. The furred world's beauty industry would be unimaginably larger, servicing the grooming needs of every single person on Earth. The economic scale would dwarf our cosmetics and fashion industries combined. This would create different patterns of wealth and labor, different corporate structures, different cultural values around appearance. The pressure to maintain appearance would be universal and constant, unable to be hidden under clothing or postponed by wearing the same outfit day after day. In some ways, this might be more honest, in others, more oppressive. Environmental history might differ. Without the pressure to develop clothing, certain plants cultivated for textiles in our world might never be domesticated, changing agricultural history. The absence of wool production might mean different sheep breeds, different patterns of animal domestication. Cotton might remain a minor crop, altering colonial economics and slavery patterns in the Americas. Instead, plants used for grooming products, dyes, and oils would be cultivated intensively, creating different agricultural landscapes. Deforestation might occur in different regions for different reasons, though human environmental impact would likely remain substantial. Medical history would show different diseases, different health concerns, different breakthroughs. In our world, clothing-related ailments, textile worker diseases, and conditions related to covered skin developed. In the furred world, parasite-borne diseases would be more common. Different forms of dermatitis would afflict populations. Occupational hazards of professional groomers would require treatment. Medical science would address different problems, potentially making different discoveries, delaying some advances while accelerating others. The trajectory of biological understanding would be altered, though eventually converging towards similar overall knowledge. Our climate change crisis involves changing temperature patterns affecting bare-skinned humans who rely on artificial climate control and clothing. In the furred world, the same climate change would affect naturally insulated humans differently. Perhaps the crisis would be less acute for individuals, though global implications would remain severe. Or perhaps it would be worse, with people unable to adapt quickly to changing temperatures, as fur takes time to modify. Migration pressures might be more intense, with people whose fur density suited their ancestral climate unable to remain in regions that have warmed or cooled beyond their comfort range. The common element between timelines is human nature itself, the capacity for creativity and cruelty, cooperation and conflict, love and hate. Whether furred or not, humans would still build civilizations, wage wars, create art, develop technology, and struggle with the eternal questions of meaning and mortality. The surface differences, however striking, might ultimately matter less than the deeper continuities of consciousness, curiosity, and the drive to understand our place in the universe. Fur or no fur, we would still be human, still searching for answers to the same fundamental questions.
As this long reflection draws toward its close, as thoughts settle like sediment in water, we return to the simple recognition that history could have been otherwise. The world you know is one possibility among countless others, each branching from different moments, different choices, different biological accidents. Tonight we have explored just one such path, where humanity pepped its fur and created something both familiar and alien, something that might have been.
Imagine lying in that world tonight, in whatever era you choose to place yourself. Perhaps you are in ancient times, a hunter resting by a fire, your companions grooming each other as stars wheel overhead, the same stars we see, but reflected in different eyes. Or perhaps you are in a modern apartment in a furred world's equivalent of your own city, scrolling through images of grooming styles while absently running fingers through your own coat, feeling the texture that has been part of humanity since its beginning. In either age, you're human, recognizably yourself, yet shaped by the simple presence of something your ancestors in our timeline lost. What would you look like in that world? What color would your fur be? Would it be thick or fine, straight or curled? Would you prefer long or short grooming? What patterns might you cut into it? What meanings might they carry? These questions have no answers because that world does not exist. But in the space before sleep, imagination can create what reality never did. You can feel phantom fur covering your arms, can imagine the weight and warmth of it, can visualize yourself sitting while someone you trust grooms you carefully, their attention a form of love. There is something restful in alternate histories, in the recognition that what is was not inevitable. The world could have been different. It could be different tomorrow if we make different choices. Not about fur, we cannot change our evolutionary past, but about so many other things. The same creativity that lets us imagine furred humans lets us imagine better futures, different solutions, alternative paths through the challenges we face. History is not destiny. Biology is not fate. We can dream of other worlds and perhaps build toward them. This is why we tell stories like these in the quiet hours, why we let our minds wander down paths not taken. Not to escape the world as it is, but to recognize that the world as it is came about through specific circumstances, could have been otherwise, and therefore can still be changed in its future unfolding. We are not locked into any particular fate. We inherit history, but we also make it, moment by moment, choice by choice. Understanding this is liberating. The people of the furred timeline, if they existed, would face their own challenges, carry their own burdens, experience their own joys. Their lives would not be better or worse than ours in any absolute sense, merely different. They would struggle with the same fundamental human experiences of love, loss, meaning, and mortality. Their children would play and laugh, their elders would grow tired, their lovers would embrace, their artists would create, their philosophers would question. The fur would be detail, not destiny. The human spirit would shine through regardless. As you drift toward sleep, perhaps you will dream of that other world. Perhaps you will see yourself walking through an ancient city where everyone you pass shows their identity in their fur, where strangers can be read at a glance but still hold mysteries beneath their styled exteriors. Or perhaps you will dream of something else entirely, your mind taking these thoughts as starting points for its own nocturnal journeys. Dreams need no permission, require no consistency, answer to no authority. In dreams, we are all alternate histories, possibilities unrealized, worlds that never were, but feel real nonetheless. Thank you for spending this time in imagination, for lending your attention to a world that exists only in the space between words and thoughts. Whether you are listening in bright morning or deep night, whether you are alone or accompanied, whether you will sleep soon or remain awake, you have traveled with us through this scenario. We hope it has given you something to think about, some new perspective on the familiar world, some recognition of how contingent everything is, how much depends on small changes propagated through time. Sleep well if sleep is where you are headed. Rest in the knowledge that tomorrow you awake to a world without fur, a world where humans chose a different evolutionary path and created the reality you inhabit. It is a world with its own beauty, its own challenges, its own possibilities. It is the world we have, the only world we will ever truly know. But in moments like these, in the space between waking and sleep, in the quiet reflections of late-night thought, we can visit other worlds, walk other paths, see ourselves in other forms. Good night, wherever you are, whatever time it is as you hear these words. May your rest be peaceful, your dreams be interesting, and your awakening be gentle. The alternate histories will still be here when you return, waiting in the space of imagination, ready to be explored again whenever you wish to consider how things might have been, how differently the story could have gone, how much possibility lives in a single change propagated through time.